Hello, my friend. Today you are going to learn English by understanding the one question that every single English learner eventually arrives at, the question that sits at the center of everything, the question that separates the people who transform their relationship with English from the people who spend years studying without ever truly arriving. The question is this: how do you speak English fluently? Not correctly, not accurately, not impressively, fluently. That specific word, fluently, points to something that grammar lessons and vocabulary lists and pronunciation drills cannot fully reach. Fluency is not a collection of correct answers. Fluency is a state of flow. It is the experience of language moving through you rather than being assembled by you. It is the difference between building a sentence and speaking one, between performing English and living in it. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly how it happens, what it requires, and what you need to start doing or stop doing to get there. Before I say anything else, I want to tell you something about the word fluent itself, because most people misunderstand what it means, and that misunderstanding is one of the reasons so many people feel like fluency is permanently out of reach. When most people say they want to speak English fluently, what they picture is a native speaker. Someone whose English is effortless, whose accent is perfect, whose vocabulary is vast and precisely deployed, who never pauses to search for a word, who never makes a grammatical error, who sounds as though they were born inside the language because they were. And when they compare this image to their own current reality, the pauses, the mistakes, the searching, the approximations, the distance feels so enormous that fluency becomes something other people have, something that belongs to a different category of person than themselves. But this picture of fluency is wrong. It is wrong because it conflates fluency with nativeness, and these are completely different things. Fluency means the ability to express yourself in a language with ease, with continuity, with enough automaticity that the language itself stops being the primary focus of your attention, and the communication, the actual human exchange of ideas and feelings, becomes the focus instead. By this definition, fluency is absolutely achievable for a non-native speaker. I know this because I achieved it. Not native-level English, not accent-free English, not English that any informed listener would mistake for a first language, but English in which I could be fully myself, express complex ideas with precision, connect with people across enormous cultural distances, and feel that the language was a tool in my hands rather than an obstacle in my way. That is fluency, and it is available to you. Now I want to tell you something that I have never heard another person say in the context of English learning, something that took me years to understand fully, even though I was living it every day. Fluency is not a destination. It is not a place you arrive at and then stay in permanently. It is a practice. It is something you maintain and develop and deepen through continued use. The same way a musician maintains their ability, not by virtue of having learned to play, but by continuing to play. The people who lose fluency are the people who stop using the language, and the people who keep deepening their fluency, who find that their English is better at 50 than it was at 30, richer and more natural and more genuinely expressive, are the people who never stopped, who found ways to keep English present in their lives, kept finding new people to talk to, new things to read, new ideas to grapple with in English, every year without exception. I want to start with something fundamental, something that most conversations about fluency skip straight past in their rush to give practical advice. And that is the question of what is actually happening in the brain when someone speaks fluently. Because if you understand what is happening, you will understand why the practices that build fluency work. And that understanding will make you far more committed to those practices and far more patient with the process. When a fluent speaker produces language, the process is not primarily conscious. They are not selecting words from a mental vocabulary list, checking them against grammar rules, assembling them into a sentence, reviewing the sentence for correctness, and then speaking it. This is what a non-fluent speaker does, and it is why non-fluent speech sounds halting and effortful and mechanical, because it is halting and effortful and mechanical. The conscious mind is doing work that, in fluent speech, has been transferred to automatic processes. Fluent speech emerges from systems in the brain that operate below the level of conscious attention, systems that have been trained through thousands and thousands of hours of input and output until they can produce language the way the legs produce walking, automatically, continuously, without the conscious mind having to manage each step. This means that the path to fluency is the path to automaticity. And the path to automaticity is not studying. It is not knowing more grammar rules or memorizing more vocabulary. It is practice, the right kind of practice, the kind that gradually transfers language production from the slow, effortful, conscious system to the fast, automatic, unconscious system. Every time you speak English, every time you produce a sentence, even an imperfect one, even a sentence you are not sure is grammatically correct, you are contributing to this transfer. You are training the automatic system. You are building the pathways that will eventually carry your English without conscious effort. And every time you avoid speaking, every time you choose silence over imperfect speech, you are delaying that transfer. You are keeping your English in the conscious system, where it will always feel effortful, and denying it access to the automatic system, where it could feel natural. This is the single most important thing I want you to understand about fluency. It is built through speaking, not through studying. Not primarily, not mainly, not even significantly through studying. Through speaking, through the actual, physical, social act of producing English in real time, with all the imperfection and discomfort that entails. Every hour of speaking is worth more to your fluency than 10 hours of study. This is not to say that study has no value. Input is important. Vocabulary building is important. Exposure to correct and natural English is important. But if you want to speak fluently, the practice that matters most is the practice of speaking. Let me now talk about something called chunking, because it is one of the most practically powerful concepts in fluency development and one of the least discussed. Chunking refers to the way fluent speakers do not produce language word by word, but in chunks, phrases, collocations, fixed expressions, idioms, sentence frames that are stored and retrieved as single units rather than assembled word by word each time. When a native speaker says something like, "As a matter of fact," or "Now that you mention it," or "I could not agree more," or "At the end of the day," they are not selecting each word individually and placing it next to the others. They are retrieving a pre-assembled unit that exists in their memory as a single piece, the way a musician plays a familiar chord without thinking about the individual notes. This is why native speakers sound so smooth and continuous. They are not always building sentences from scratch. They are combining pre-assembled chunks with individually generated language in a way that sounds seamless from the outside, but is actually a hybrid of automatic retrieval and real-time construction. And this is why learning chunks, learning common phrases and expressions as units, not just learning their individual words, is one of the fastest paths to fluency for a non-native speaker. When you have a large enough store of chunks, you can carry large portions of any conversation on automatic pilot, freeing your conscious attention for the genuinely new parts, the specific information you need to convey, the particular argument you need to make, the precise emotion you need to express. How do you build a store of chunks? By paying deliberate attention to them when you encounter them. Every time you hear or read a natural English phrase that you could not have produced yourself, not an unusual word, but an unexpected combination of common words, a particular way of expressing something that feels natural and idiomatic in English, write it down, not the individual words, the whole phrase. And then, crucially, practice using it. In sentences, in contexts, out loud. The goal is not to memorize it consciously, but to use it enough times that it becomes available automatically, that it becomes part of your repertoire of chunks that the brain can retrieve without effort, the way it retrieves your own name. I want to talk now about the role of listening in developing speaking fluency, because this connection is deeper and more direct than most people realize. Your speaking is bounded by your listening. The sounds you can produce are limited to the sounds you have heard clearly enough and frequently enough to internalize. The rhythms you can speak are limited to the rhythms you have been exposed to. The chunks you can use are limited to the chunks you have encountered. This means that a fundamental part of training your speaking is training your ear, developing the ability to hear English with the precision and detail that allows you to absorb and eventually reproduce what you hear. Most people listen to English for comprehension. They listen to understand the content, to extract the information or the narrative or the argument. This kind of listening is valuable, but it is not the same as listening for language. Listening for language means paying attention to how something is said, not just what is said. It means noticing the specific words the speaker chooses, the order in which they arrange their ideas, the phrases that appear in this context rather than other phrases that mean something similar, the rhythm and stress and melody of the sentences, the way the speaker signals transitions between ideas, the way they express uncertainty or emphasis or humor or seriousness. All of these things are available in every piece of English you listen to, and most learners walk straight past them because they are focused on content rather than language. Start listening to English with a second layer of attention. Keep your primary attention on the content. You need to understand what is being said in order to learn from it, but cultivate a secondary layer of attention that watches the language itself the way a chef watches another chef cook, not just for the dish that results, but for the techniques, the choices, the decisions that produced it. This dual attention is a skill that develops with practice, and it will accelerate your language acquisition in ways that single-focus listening cannot. I also want to spend significant time on something that is at the heart of fluency and that most people approach in entirely the wrong way, which is the speaking practice itself. Specifically, I want to talk about what makes speaking practice effective versus ineffective, because not all speaking practice is equal. Speaking practice that merely feels productive can actually reinforce bad habits and create a false sense of progress. And speaking practice that feels uncomfortable and difficult is often exactly the kind that produces the fastest real development. The most common form of speaking practice that feels productive but is actually ineffective is rehearsed speaking. Preparing what you are going to say in advance, then saying it. Writing out your ideas and then reading them or reciting them. Practicing the same phrases and sentences you have already practiced many times before, in the comfortable territory where you already know what works. This kind of practice feels good because it feels successful. The language comes out correctly, the words are there, the grammar is right, but it is not training the brain for the actual challenge of real-time spontaneous English communication, which requires producing language you have never produced before, in response to input you could not anticipate, in a social context that generates emotional pressure. Rehearsed practice does not simulate these conditions. It simulates only its own comfortable, controlled self. The kind of speaking practice that actually builds fluency is spontaneous speaking. Speaking without preparation, without a script, without knowing in advance what you are going to say. Speaking in response to genuine questions, in real conversations, in situations where the language has to be produced in the moment with all the uncertainty and searching that entails. This kind of practice is uncomfortable precisely because it is genuine training. It places real demands on the automatic language system. It forces the brain to reach for language that is not yet fully automatic, which is exactly the productive struggle that builds new pathways. Every moment of discomfort in spontaneous speaking is a moment of genuine neural development, and every moment of comfort in rehearsed speaking is a moment of pleasant but limited consolidation. This does not mean rehearsed practice has no value. It does, particularly in the early stages, and particularly for building the foundational chunks and phrases that will later become available in spontaneous speech. But if you have been learning English for more than a year and you are still spending most of your practice time in rehearsed, comfortable, controlled speaking situations, you are working very hard while moving very slowly. The discomfort is the signal. Follow it. I remember a specific period in my English journey when I realized that I had been avoiding a particular kind of discomfort for several months. I had become comfortable with certain topics. I could talk about my city, about the places tourists wanted to visit, about food and culture and history. These conversations felt natural and fluent to me. And I had been unconsciously steering every interaction toward these comfortable topics, away from anything that required me to speak about things I had not spoken about before. I felt fluent in those moments. But I was not building fluency. I was performing the fluency I already had while avoiding the work that would have extended it. When I realized this, I made a deliberate decision to steer toward the unfamiliar, to ask tourists about topics I knew nothing about, to share opinions about things I had never tried to put into English before, to follow conversations wherever they led rather than where I found it comfortable to go. The first few weeks of this were genuinely difficult. The language was not there in the way it had been. I stumbled more. I searched more. But within 2 months, my English had extended into new territory in ways that those months of comfortable conversation had not achieved. Seek the unfamiliar in content, in vocabulary, in the people you speak with, in the topics you engage with. The familiar is not where fluency grows. It is where fluency rests. Growth happens at the edge of your current capability, in the territory that is slightly beyond where you are comfortable, where the language is not yet automatic, and the effort is real, and the brain is genuinely working. That edge is where you want to spend most of your practice time. Not all of it. You need the resting territory too, for consolidation and for confidence. But most of it. The edge is where the work happens. I want to talk now about something that I think of as the fluency illusion, because it is something that trips up many English learners and causes enormous discouragement at stages where discouragement is particularly damaging. The fluency illusion is the experience of feeling fluent in one context and then being shocked to discover that the fluency does not transfer to another context. You have English conversations with your classmates or your study partners, and you feel confident, natural, smooth, and then you walk into a meeting with native speakers and your fluency seems to evaporate. Or you can discuss your area of professional expertise with ease, but find yourself completely lost in a casual social conversation about something you know nothing about. Or your listening fluency is high. You can understand most of what native speakers say, but your speaking fluency is lagging far behind. These gaps are not illusions. They are real. Fluency is context-specific in ways that most people do not expect. The English you build in one context does not automatically transfer to other contexts. The brain builds specific pathways for specific types of language use, and those pathways need to be built separately through specific practice in those specific contexts. This means that if you want to be fluent in professional English, you need to practice professional English specifically, not just English in general. If you want to be fluent in casual conversation, you need to practice casual conversation specifically. If you want your listening fluency to support your speaking fluency, you need to practice both in integrated ways, not separately. This is more work than most people anticipate, but it is also more manageable than it might sound, because every new context you practice in builds on the foundation of the others. The professional English and the casual English, and the formal English and the technical English are not completely separate languages. They share a vast common foundation, and the work you do in any one of them contributes to all the others. The key is to be intentional, to identify the specific English contexts that matter most in your life, and to practice those contexts specifically, not just English in general, and hope that it transfers. Let me now give you something very concrete and very practical, a specific approach to daily speaking practice that I have seen produce remarkable results in people who commit to it consistently. The approach has 3 components, and it is designed to be done in 30 to 40 minutes a day, which is enough time to make genuine progress without requiring a restructuring of your entire life. The first component is what I think of as warm-up speaking. 5 to 10 minutes of unstructured, unpressured English speaking, done alone, before anyone else is listening. Describe what you see around you. Tell yourself what happened yesterday. Say what you are planning to do today. Talk about something you are curious about, or worried about, or excited about. The content does not matter. The goal is simply to warm up the speaking mechanism, to get the English moving through you before the real practice begins. The way a musician plays scales before performing, not because scales are the music, but because they prepare the instrument. The second component is what I call focused speaking. 15 to 20 minutes of speaking practice on a specific topic or in a specific context that you want to develop. This is where you deliberately leave your comfort zone. Choose a topic you have never tried to discuss in English before. Find a conversation partner who speaks differently from the people you usually practice with. Put yourself in a speaking situation that generates genuine uncertainty and genuine effort. Record yourself if you are practicing alone, and then listen back not to judge but to notice, to observe what is working, what is not yet working, and what specific language you want to build that the practice revealed was not yet there. The third component is reflection. 5 minutes after the focused speaking to identify one thing you wanted to say and could not, and to find the English for it now. Look it up. Say it out loud several times. Put it in several different sentences. Make it yours before the practice session ends, so that the gap that speaking revealed becomes a resource that studying fills. This loop, speaking reveals gaps, studying fills them, speaking builds them into automatic language, is the engine of fluency development. It is how the vocabulary and the grammar that you study get converted into the automatic language that fluency requires. I want to close with something about patience, because everything I have described today requires it. And patience is the quality that separates the people who eventually speak English fluently from the people who study for years and never quite arrive. Patience not as passive waiting, but as active, committed long-term engagement with a process whose results are not always immediately visible, but are always, if the practice is genuine, accumulating. I rode that bicycle for 9 years, not 9 weeks, 9 years. The fluency I eventually reached was not the result of any single breakthrough or any single method or any single conversation. It was the result of 9 years of mornings, 9 years of conversations, 9 years of mistakes and recoveries, and small improvements that individually felt like nothing, but collectively became everything. There were months during those 9 years when I felt that I was not improving at all, when my English felt exactly the same as it had 6 months before, and I wondered whether the mornings and the bicycle and the cold and the effort were producing anything at all. The evidence was just not yet visible. The brain was working below the surface, building connections that would not reveal themselves until they were complete. Your brain is doing the same thing right now. Every English conversation you have had, every English podcast you have listened to, every English sentence you have produced, however imperfectly, it has all been building something. The pathways are there. The foundation is there. And the fluency that feels so far away is not as far as the distance between where you started and where you are now. It is closer. It is always closer than the fear tells you. Speak today, speak tomorrow, speak in the situations that frighten you and in the ones that bore you and in the ones that feel too small to matter. Because no speaking moment is too small to matter. Every word is a brick. Every conversation is a wall. And one day, sooner than you think, you will step back and see what you have built. And you will not believe that it came from something as simple and as profound as the decision to open your mouth and try. Open your mouth. Try. The fluency is already inside you, waiting for enough practice to bring it out. Go find it.